icebreakers?
Oh yeah. So we could all go around with their name and our sign. And we can say how we found out about this event and like that'd be cute. I'll go first. Since I know Savita, I'm a Pisces, and I was a co-founder of Lovelessness. And I've lived in Lancaster. I'm Liz. I'm on Leo, and I'm here because Brian came into my bookstore and I was like, "Do you read?" And I said yes. And he's like, "Come to my book club." I was like, "Okay." I was like, "What are we reading?" And I was sure. And I've been in Lancaster since 2019 or 2020. I can't remember. That was 2019.
Okay, I'm Audrey. I'm Capricorn, which is the worst sign. Please don't judge me. Yeah, I'm grounded and I love money. Okay, what else am I supposed to? Okay, I found out about this because I met Brian at a bar through you. And Brian was like, this thing, and I was like, this sounds great. And also, I've always wanted to read Bell Hooks books, especially because she died last year. So I was like, gotta get on this. This is the perfect opportunity. And I have been in Lancaster since like November. So hi.
Well, I'm Josie. I'm a Capricorn. Hello. Yeah, I know.
Do you also love money?
I also love money and the earth. Yeah, I've been in Lancaster for about 2 years now, going on 3. And Brian's a good friend of mine, so Ray's a good friend. You guys are good friends. So, of course, it's kind of all come together that I'm living here. So,
I'm Brian with Savita, one of the co-founders of the Lancaster Changemakers Collective. We created Changemaker Chats back in 2020. We created the organization back in 2020. I've spearheaded this specific installment of Changemaker Chats, which is why I'm here. And yeah, I didn't realize like the word of mouth thing, like actually like all I had to do was be like, I'm reading a book. Do you read? Okay, come. I am also a Capricorn. I love the earth. I think that the stereotype of Capricorns just loving money is
True.
but it's a little bit like diluted and just like surface level. I think that Capricorns appreciate the value of things, the value of time, of relationships, of the work that we put in, and whether or not that gives us affection, money, whatever it is, like we just appreciate the value in the give and take. So that's my thought on Capricorns and money. And
redeem us.
Yeah. But yes, I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy that you are all here. Yeah, I'm happy to have read this book. And I'm happy to talk about it.
a great icebreaker.
Can you do another? I don't know if you have any.
I'm so happy that the Capricorns are like in full force.
They're not.
Well, I kind of wanted this to be set up like a Paideia seminar, like a Socratic seminar. I don't think that's what this is. It was a public school thing. I didn't know even. Anyway, so but like when I first, like we've done Changemaker Chats in the past that like had like a full slideshow, had a full, like lesson plan, like we explain things, we ask questions, people get answers, people have questions, we get answers, like that, kind of like vice versa. And I went into this one trying to do that again, but also this is our first time having a Changemaker Chats that has the in-person aspect to it. The rest have all just been like completely over Zoom. So like half into the month, I was like, I actually don't want to like do a whole lesson plan because I don't like feeling like I'm giving a TED talk. I don't like feeling like I'm giving a. I don't like feeling like I'm like giving like a lecture. Hi. I I don't like feeling like I'm giving a lecture. So I want it to be more of like an open discussion, like if anybody has notes that they want to bring up, certain ideas that they want to bring up, questions that they have, I will be doing the same. I want to come to this like on the same level as everyone in regard to the conversation that we're having. We're all on the same tier. And yeah, like anybody's allowed to respond to anybody, you know, like typical just grown up group discussions. Yeah, so I think at first, like I think, oh my goodness, yeah, we just did an icebreaker. It's okay. You wanna say your name, your sign, and how you heard of this event, and what like brought you here.
Yeah, I'm actually. I found you guys through Instagram. So I've been following for a little bit, wanting to like get involved, but kind of been waiting like in-person thing to get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really excited. You're welcome. Yeah, thanks.
Should we rapid fire this one?
Yeah, background.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm Saveda, I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm Liz, I'm a Leo, so like we're like besties. The side thing.
I'm Audrey, I'm a Capricorn.
Jody,
Brian Capricorn, also co-founder. But yeah, I mean, I was just about to ask this like first question that I have here. If someone asked you, and I know like I kind of had to do this when like bringing it up in person to people that I was inviting, like how would you briefly describe or summarize this book to a friend? Like what like primarily stuck out to you? What do you think would be the thing that would entice somebody to also read this book? Would you even recommend this book? Yeah, so if anybody has any, I know that you all, like, people that I've talked to, I literally recommended this book to all of you,
Yeah.
so, yeah, but like, would you extend that recommendation? Would you, and how would you describe it if you could?
Absolutely, I would say it's in the summary in the back of the cover of the book, it says it already, it's love should be used as a verb and not a noun. So it's more of the practice of practicing love and giving love instead of just talking about it and feeling about it. So yeah, I would extend that to anyone in their life. It's a good loving practice. That's all I have to say about that.
I would second that. I think I did describe it that way to
Yeah.
a couple of people, and then I liked the section where she was talking about like family unit, like almost like that just amount of power that parents have over their children, and just talking about families in general. I think she mentioned like the idea that like if we don't use love as a verb, think of it as like an action and give it like a full definition that like has requirements, then you're allowed to say things like, you know, parents can do whatever they want with their children because they love them. Mothers love their children. That's not always true. Or like he killed her because he loved her so much. Like you couldn't say that if you decided to make a definition of love, which I really like that about the book.
Yeah, I think like the use of love as a noun as this thing that is outside, something that we are yearning for, something that is outside of us, something that we're constantly trying to gain and like acquire. It makes it almost like indescribable. It makes it unable to even have a clear definition. And I think that that's something that she talks about as well. One of the other questions that I have right here is like, how, like when we view love as a noun, like what is a noun that you would apply? I don't know if I say this. Like, what is an example of using love as a noun versus a verb? Like, I personally don't really have an answer to that. And I think that, yeah, to me, that's like the trouble defining it when we use it as a noun because I'm losing it. But I don't know. I think using love as a verb, describing love as a verb, goes into the like accountability and responsibility for our actions. Love is something that we do. Josie, we talked last night and you brought up the quote, like love is as love does. It is something that we do. It's not something that we're trying to achieve. It's not something that we're yearning for. We have to cultivate it within ourselves and then express it to the people around us, the communities around us, the spaces around us. And that, yeah, that is love. Love is within us. It's not necessarily without us. And we are never without it.
I think we were talking about love as a knack. I was trying to think of how I use it. And like one of the things, for example, is like, I love chicken Alfredo. Does chicken Alfredo love me back? No.
Yeah.
Because, but like when I say I love my friends, and I've been thinking about love languages a lot. So I just think about like one of my love languages is quality time. So when I'm showing love to friends with me, and I'm taking time out of my day to spend with them, I feel like that's what I'm showing love. Love over some active thing, showing people that I care about.
I really loved the word clarity that she uses. I've been thinking a lot about. I think actually talks about, I think when we care about something, we do pay more attention to it, and a lot of times that manifests itself in giving clarity to our words if we actually need when we're saying something. I think, and in thinking about what are the implications of love being a verb, I'm in a lot of conversations with different friends about politics and policy, and I posted about this book, and one of my acquaintances that is in a very different place than I am. It's like, well, I would argue, he was saying he would argue that, where he is coming from, the policymakers that he aligns with, they're also making their decisions out of love. And so I think that is sort of like when that is why it's important to define what we mean by love, because there are very clear implications when it is a verb because it affects other people. And
Yeah.
like she was talking about that, the capitalistic, like individualistic mindset, and when we start using love as a verb, it forces us, like the impact immediately goes outside of ourselves. So yeah, I love that, just her challenge to clarify like what we're actually saying when we say that. Because it was so easy to just throw it out without thinking about it.
That reminded me, like, that just reminded me of like growing up. I always heard that clean is a strong word and you should say it. And I say it all the time. But then it wasn't until high school, so I was like, what, 16, 17, where someone told me love is also a strong word too, and you should throw that around. I was like, whoa. Because I love foods, I love clothing stores, and I love people, but I can't just go around and say I love all these people because it's not true. Like I don't show them the same time and respect and energy that I do to people that I actually love. I feel like that goes on clarity too. Like where are you saying you say love? Like, oh, I love Brian. But it's like me and Brian have been through so many ups and downs together, and I feel like our history together, the time that we spent cultivating this friendship is what I feel like our love is built on versus an acquaintance per se. And like, oh, I love her. And how do you talk to her about like where she gets her like organic cheese from? Like, it doesn't equate.
Yeah.
Like when she touches on that, how like love and care often get mixed up with each other. You can say that you care for someone, and that's that acquaintance thing. Like, oh, I care for her because she has really good recommendation on vegan cheeses.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily love her.
But, and like she goes further to say that care is only one aspect out of like 7 or 8 different things that all come together to make love. It's about respect. It's about recognition of the other person, open communication, commitment. Like, yes, care is part of it, but it's so much more than just that. And I feel like when we talk about like parents and the family structure, and the ways in which parents do have that like fascist, like authoritarian power over their children, Yeah, I would say like most parents care for their children. Most parents, are in one way or another committed to their children. But there tends to be, in a lot of households, and I think like personally, like there's like, respect is not always there. Because, and she talks about this too, like we tend to not view children with the same rights as adults. Children are not, given the grace of like basic human rights, and they're viewed mainly as property of other people. But yeah, so like the respect of that, honesty, we don't usually give that to children. We don't trust children all the time. We don't trust their emotions. We don't trust their thoughts and their inputs. Because again, that relates into the respect. We just don't respect their input or what their perspective might be. So it's like, I think I'm getting into the, like where she says, talking about her own family and realizing that she grew up in a family, in a household that when she looks back on it, really wasn't a loving environment. And yeah, like that's not to say that just because care, affection, and respect are there, care, affection, respect are there, and the others aren't, that doesn't negate the care or the respect. It just simply, you can have 3 or 4 of them and not all of the others. But yeah, I think it's a hard thing, and she says that it's like a hard thing for people to realize that they grew up in a household that wasn't loving, because the way that we're taught about family, the way that we're taught about our parents and how we should think about them and think about how we grew up. We should always give them grace. Whatever was happening, we should always just give our parents grace. And yeah, to an extent we should, but also like we have to be honest with ourselves. And if we are able to be honest with them and say, hey, these are the ways in which, I wasn't loved, not necessarily unloved, but these are just the ways in which I didn't get an adequate language of love. I wasn't taught how to fully by you because you weren't able to fully love. You weren't able to fully love me, and that's okay. But a lot of parents just simply aren't able to grasp that.
I think I liked the section on like loving communion. I highlighted this like crazy, so here we go. 136. Had I been evaluating my relationship from a standpoint that emphasized growth rather than duty and obligation, I wouldn't understand that abuse irreparably undermines bonds. So I think that's like that duty and obligation thing is really interesting, because like that, that is what a lot of people think of when they think of family. Like, oh, you have to love your family, but like I learned very early on that like I don't love a lot of my family. I may like them or kind of deal with them, but I don't love them, and that's okay. And I think like in the same chapter, 132, she says, research by anthropologists and sociologists indicates that small privatized units, especially those organized around patriarchal thinking, are unhealthy environments for everyone. So I think like what you were talking about with like the policy changes, like maybe you don't love, like maybe you do love chicken Alfredo and chicken Alfredo doesn't love you back, but like, there are things that like you don't love that you can like offer love to by like enacting policy change, or like by supporting like institutions or ways of living that would be supportive to people. So like thinking of like people living in like broader families, she talked about like people in her life offering her love who were not her parents, and that being like the scaffolding through which she could come to understand love. Like there are ways to like find it outside of the traditional avenues that we find love on a daily basis. And I thought I really liked that particular chapter for that reason. Like talking about like, okay, we can find community and find love in those communities if we go looking for it. But I also like, I think there's something to be said for like forming communities with intention and like with love as the underlying principles. Like if your friend or like acquaintance or whoever is like advocating for policies through like an organization that like isn't founded on the basis of love, like and they don't have that like love ethic at the core of their mission statement, like how are they going to be doing that, And I think you can say, well, it comes from a place of love. That's really, really easy because we don't have a definition. And if we require more definitions of it from institutions, then we would know they were acting from love. Or we would be able to pick apart, like, hey, you say you're acting from love, but like, let's look at this thing that you wrote about how you intend to like act upon the world around you. And
Like
what you're doing is not like fulfilling that statement. I think that's like a powerful like takeaway that I got from this book for sure.
Do you want to introduce yourself? So the icebreaker was say your name, your sign, and what brought you here.
There's 4 of us. We have a show.
Did you call me? Okay.
I'm here to start the book.
Brian, what you were saying, I can't remember exactly what you said that made me think it, but in talking again about like the language that we use to, I guess, define what we mean, how we say love. I wonder if I think of some things like allyship, for instance, and the conversation around that, and the importance of like, I'm not going to walk around and call myself an ally. I'm going to allow those who need allyship to recognize what I'm doing by my actions and say, oh, you're an ally. I wonder if similarly there is strength to like, instead of me saying like, no, I love you, like there's strength to like when another person declares like, you love me, because they're the one on the receiving end of that verb, like the action of love. Not to say that we can never say like, I love you to a person, but I think of relationships that I'm in that when it is really meaningful, especially I work with kids a lot, and it's like, it means so much when a little kid comes up to you and recognizes like, you love me, like because they see what you're doing as a safe, adult to them. Yeah, that's what you're talking about. So I think just sort of that first chapter for kind of talking about like how we define love.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was like going for a breakup or like about to break up with someone. This book convinced me to break up with someone. And I like that speaks to me because I was like, you don't love me. You say you love me all the time, but you don't love me. Like, and maybe you don't get to say that. Maybe the other person should be like, you love me. And then they can tell you, you love me. And then you can say, I love you. Oh, to the other person. I would love that idea.
Yeah. Like the concept of having a safe space. That's very true. Feel safe. That's love it.
Yeah, I mean, like she talks a lot about children and the ways in which we view children and the way that children need to be a part of these conversations as well, in a way that's, like intellectually appropriate for them. But we need to, like, the same as like public policy and discussions like this, like we need to carry these into our everyday lives, not only with adults, but with teenagers and children, she says, because they need to be learning just as much as we are when we're talking about all these different things. And I also, like, I work with kids, I work here at a preschool, and like a lot of it was just like, it's just really eye-opening in the ways that I'm going about teaching the kids, in the ways in which I'm not directly teaching them, but just like emotionally and socially teaching them, and trying to, stay calm. Like everybody, like all of my coworkers are like, oh, you're so patient. Like they've been saying that, but now I'm like catching myself like actively being patient with them instead of just like having that be a part of, like a passive part of my personality. It's something that I'm like actively paying attention to. I'm like, oh, I am actively being patient with this kid. I'm actually taking the time to listen to them and hear their perspective, and listen to how they feel and validate how they're feeling, at the same time teaching them ways to cope with their emotions and ways in which to maintain friendships and maintain just I think like emotional stability in a way that is just not denouncing them, like not saying that feeling is bad, just here's how you can work through that feeling. I've been doing a lot of that this past month, like since reading this book. Yeah, it's been really eye-opening. It's weird, like I wasn't in a relationship when I started reading this book. I would say one of the main takeaways that I've gotten from this book is how I'm dealing with the kids that I work with. I find that really interesting.
Like in the one chapter, like you're being honest, and in this one part, it definitely touches on that. It says in far too many cases, children are punished in circumstances where they respond with honesty to a question posed by an adult authority figure. It is impressed on their consciousness early on that telling the truth will cause pain.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like a full example of you being honest and giving you that space to be honest and not have like that question of like, being in trouble, like being punished for it.
Yeah.
Oh, that page was 34. Yeah. The last paragraph. And I can appreciate that because we need a lot more figures like that in our lives. That I've definitely have memories in my childhood where I was punished for telling the truth. So I feel like that's definitely trailed on in my life, and there's going through therapy and support group makes it a lot better. But after now in my life, knowing that makes me want to be that figure for kids.
Yeah.
To offer that safe space.
I think there was at some point in our history like a campaign that was run maybe in the like early 90s by the federal government about listening to children about child abuse, because like we are so habituated to not listening to children. The children were saying like I'm being abused to their parents or to like the authority figures, and they were like, no, you're not. And it's just wild to me that like we acknowledged as a society that was happening and then continued on like treating our children exactly the same way, except with that one instance here.
Yeah, so some shelter combined.
Yeah, I think that we learned very early on, like even like whether or not it is like to not hurt ourselves or to not hurt others, we learned very early on that the truth hurts. And I think that we like dealing with kids and everybody deals with kids in one way or another, but like one of the things is like kids are mean because kids can be like, we view it as mean, but what they're doing is just being honest at times. And it's like, oh, like, the kid's like, why does your hair look like that today? They're like, oh, because I like did it, I took time to do my hair. But they're just, to them, it's just like your hair looks different, and they're just asking a simple question. But so like we scold them. Generally, we scold them in situations like that because what they said hurt your feelings, even though that's not what they were trying to do. And we also do the same thing. We learn within ourselves we are taught by the adults or whoever around us, society, to belittle ourselves. I don't know if that's the right word, but just like shrink ourselves down because either how we feel or what we need to say might be abrasive or it might be just too much for others. So we shrink ourselves down or we hide certain facts from ourselves. I think it is in the honesty chapter where she talks about the false self, specifically, that men create. The masculine identity offered to men, or John Stoltenberg's book, The End of Manhood, a book for men of conscience, analyzes the extent to which the masculine identity offered men as the ideal in patriarchal culture is one that requires all males to invent and invest in a false self. From the moment little boys are taught they should not cry or express hurt, feelings of loneliness or pain, they must be tough. That they must be tough. They're learning how to mask true feelings. And yeah, I mean, I think that just kind of summarizes what I just said about like what we all do, but specifically men and males in our society are taught to do. she says on page, that was on page 38, but she says on page 36, the men I have loved have always lied to avoid confrontation or take responsibility for inappropriate behavior. We do that all the time, and we, one of the things that I've written down is, she says, our culture specifically, as Americans, condones lying as a communication device and a way to keep or acquire power over others. She says that men lie in order to keep the power that society has granted them, whereas women lie to kind of shift power in their direction. She says power is something that none of us should be striving for. None of us should be striving to have dominance or dominion over another. And lying is one of those things that that we use when communicating to get that over another. She also states that we generally value things and objects over people and connections, and that these are huge divides, both lying and the greed and the value that we hold in regard to objects and not people are what divides us as a society, and love, the idea of love. And I was just like wondering, like, what is everyone else's thoughts on that? Like, do we agree with that? Why do we not agree with that? Why do we agree that the concepts of lying, the actions of lying, as well as the certain values and creeds that we have, is that what are those two primary things that have created a divide between our society? Yeah, I do that thing where I just
Yeah, but this is like a content.
Yes.
Like, how can we talk about our society, the way that we function with lying? Like, lying is so ingrained into our culture, but honesty is not. And then when you are honest, you become the child that is reprimanded for saying your true feelings.
She says, and like this is like towards the beginning, I'm not sure what page, but she says, and she's reiterating what someone else has said, like that this work required to, create a loving culture, the work that's required to do that does also require like radical change. And I feel like that's why it's like difficult to say like, oh, like lying is so ingrained and so condoned by our culture, by our society. Like, how are we balancing that? It's like we all have to, in one way or another, like it would be easy if we could all just instantaneously decide, oh, lying is bad, let's not do it anymore. But
I don't know if it's about lying is bad, but it's like, what are the questions for honesty and with people's feelings being hurt? And if we already don't have emotional intelligence on how to deal with our emotions, because then I'm thinking about white lies and like how white lies make people feel comfortable and make people feel a certain type of like stability. So every white lie that I've ever told, if they like everyone just figured out the truth, like how do I do those questions? It's like we have to decide on that honesty and like emotional intelligence and emotional exercises to feel like, okay, this is how this person is feeling. And how it relates to me. For example, so I started with, I was with this guy, we went on dates, and then he ghosted me. And then I was feeling really sad. But I'm like, and this is the therapy, it's not from a being. But I was like, whatever he has going on and the reason why he ghosted me is like nothing to me, has nothing to do with me and everything to do with him. But that's not everybody's like thought process. Not everybody has that emotional awareness. And even if they do, like, I'm still allowed to be angry at him, I'm still allowed to be sad at the situation, but I understand that like it has nothing to do with me. But at the root of it, if he's just honest and communicating his feelings, then a lot of this stuff wouldn't have to be all like the one person. And I feel like that's what's happening. Like, one person in whatever situation it is has to do all that emotional work, and it has to carry that emotional burden because other people don't know how to be emotionally literate with their feelings.
Yeah, maybe a little too big picture, but I think a lot of times I see, like, thinking about it in those terms, It's, I see a lot of people just lying about to themselves about even like who we are as a society, like the history, like we see it every day, like what actually happened in our history, or like there are so many, there are different narratives that people are working with, different stories that people are working with, and I think in order for that radical change to happen, to tell the truth about what has happened, about who we are, requires something of us. It requires change, and that can be scary for some people. And maybe some of that does go back to what she was saying, like we are so we have not, some of us have not experienced love in certain contexts. A lot of times that's our family. And instead of being able to have an honest conversation about what that means, it has made us think that we're unlovable instead of we've been in unloving environments. And that changes, like, you know, us walking throughout the day feeling like we're unlovable. It totally changes, you know, what happens. It changes how we interact with people, how we treat people. So yeah, I think that like telling the truth about the story of ourselves, the story of like our community at large. Yeah, I think that's kind of one framework, like seeing it like truth and lying. It's like, what story are we willing to tell about ourselves, and like, what does that require of us? Does that require change? And are we willing to make that change? And I think a lot of times that's why people want to stay in a lie, because they know somewhere it's like, I'm gonna need to change something. Not to undermine, like sometimes changing things is really hard because you gotta change, it's radical change, like you're saying, like she's saying, but yeah, I know that's too big.
Makes me think of like the QAnon stuff, right? Like it's like that post-truth stuff, like all of the like conspiracy theories that are out there. It's like it's all stories that people are like telling, and they're lies, right? So you're just sort of like surrounded by everyone's like weird little story that they've glommed onto about any given thing, and it discredits truth. Like that's how people who like have those beliefs sit around and like discredit race or critical race theory, because they're like, well, that's just another story. It's like, well, some stories have truth in them and some stories do not. But then if we just like constantly inundated by like falsity, then we can't differentiate truth as well. Like, so that's how I think she talks about this in the book, like being dishonest with yourself about your own emotions. I don't remember what chapter that was.
I think it is. I think it's the honesty chapter.
Yeah, where she's talking about like you can't, like we all are kind of like divorced from our own selves, and like have an inability to like recognize our own emotional status because we've been trained like, you know, to think about emotions in like one really particular way. So like men feel anger, women feel sadness, whereas like I've often learned that like I feel anger a lot, and it is often just sadness underneath. But sometimes it's just anger, and I have a suspicion that a lot of men's anger is just sadness. So, you know, we're all like kind of, if that fundamental, like basic thing that you have to do to function, like in your daily life, which is like feel your own feelings, is like you're divorced from that. This book is sad.
I think what she's saying in that part, because she's talking about like the false self, and she says like, the false self isn't just something that we are portraying to others. At a certain point, when you've been doing it for so long, it reflects right back to you, and you believe, essentially you believe the lie that you've been telling because you've been telling it for so long, because you've invested so much time and energy into it.
It's like that thing where you like pretend you kind of fake liking something for a while, and then suddenly you like how you like it. You can trick yourself really.
But like the false self, like she basically, I think, like at the end of the chapter, she's like, but the false self never truly becomes who you are, and you're constantly like, you have this like dissonance and this battle within, because your true self is trying to come out so much. Your true self has this yearning. The true self is what transmutes into the sadness that you feel, into the anger that you feel. Because what you're portraying to others and to yourself and to society is completely the opposite of how you're feeling in your heart. And that, yeah, I think that's where like the sadness and the anger comes from. This book actually is very sad. And it doesn't really like, I don't know, she doesn't leave you with necessarily like a,
There's no action items.
yeah, like she's just kind of like, do with this what you will, do with this idea what you will. There's no action items really, like, she's just like, simply like, this is what love would be like if we were to do it. But there's no like instruction manual. She's just simply like, you gotta just jump into it. It's like, how, like, I think that that's what you're saying. Like, how do you just jump into this? Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really like, I don't know. I don't want to say that it's like not hopeful, because she definitely like, she has gotten to a point where she can write, 240 pages about it. So like, that's kind of hopeful to me, but yeah, I don't think that she's necessarily trying to be a teacher. She's not trying to instruct. She's just simply saying, here is what I've gathered. I like that, because that even in itself is I don't know, that in itself kind of, this is an idea that's coming to me right now, like, that in itself is love. She's kind of like spreading this love, because she's like, I'm not trying to, I mean, she doesn't capitalize the first letters in her name because she doesn't want her own being, her name, to be capitalized against the works that she's writing and the things that she's doing. She doesn't want to prioritize herself in this space, and even in this writing, she's not trying to have dominion over whoever's reading it and be a preacher, be a teacher. She's just simply, she's fucking talking her shit. She's just like, okay, do with it what you will. I'm not gonna tell you what to do with it. And I think that's really cool. This is the only book that I read by her, and I look forward to reading others.
She has one about masculinity that I really read and also give to all.
I think, yeah, it's like, in that way, I'm stirring things up, and in a similar way to you being in your classroom and just living that sort of patience that you are trying to cultivate. Like, that is teaching the children that you're around, like a safer, more loving way to be. In a similar way, like just sort of giving us this, like, here are what it says, new visions of what it could be. In talking about the nuclear family, at first, when I was reading the first couple chapters, I was like, actually, children so much. I just didn't expect it. I didn't expect the book to start like that. And then I think being here, like hearing you guys start to flesh out a little bit, it brought me back to that chapter where she started talking about the nuclear family and its unhealthiness and the extended family. I see like that as a tangible kind of step of like, when we bring children into like as safe, loving, nurturing adults that are not part of their nuclear family, like when we start to bring them into a vision of extended community and communities of care and safe spaces, like that is a way that we can start to combat like these very, I think she uses the word worship, like worship of the nuclear family in here, like these worship systems. So that's like one, that's one, I guess, like takeaway, more tangible, like, we can like start to create those like extended communities, even though it feels like something like the nuclear families, of course.
Because I also think that children are like deserving of multiple perspectives. Like in a nuclear family, when there's no really like outside influence from like even like the extended family or friends of parents or just whatever, they tend to just get two perspectives if it's a mother and a father or two parents like that. And most times I would hope that both parents are like kind of aligned in their perspectives. Otherwise we have a whole different problem, but, yeah, I think both like with the work that I've been doing, I've never worked with preschoolers until I started this job. And also reading this book, I think that I've become more comfortable with the idea of like not having my own children. There's just certain things with taking care of children that I realized I do not want to do at home. It's okay to do it at work, but I don't want to do it at home. But also like, I really enjoy the idea of being a part of a child's village. You know, like, I think she even says like, yeah, like that whole phrase, like it takes a village, it really does. I like the idea of being part of the village rather than like, you know, that nuclear family unit. You know, like somebody that the kid can confide in that isn't their parent, you know, because a lot of times like there are certain things that, you know, society just teaches us like, oh, you don't really want to say that to your parents. But and like I've had like friends of my parents, my aunts and uncles, like cousins or whoever that I was able to actually go to and like express things before I could even think about saying it to my mom or saying it to my dad or whatever. So the idea of being that same kind of figure in another kid's life is something that I think reading this and doing that work that I've been doing, I've just kind of honed in on, because for a long time I just viewed myself as somebody like, oh, you know, you're one of the kids, like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I actually don't. Yeah. Just a little side thought.
I have a question. Can I ask a question? Just like, I don't know if everyone wants to answer. I would love to know. I think your question about like, what do we take away from this book? Like, what do we do with this? You did. You asked a good question. I think that's a great question, and I would love to hear like what everybody thinks like they would take away from it. Because I think one of the really powerful parts of this book is like, we were talking about this before everybody got here, but like I was a little annoyed while reading it that like it's that she talks about like the same stuff over and over and over again. But then if you kind of like look at the chapters and like as we've kind of been jumping around, I'm realizing like it all touches on different stuff. So like grace, clarity, justice, honesty, commitment, spirituality, values, create community, mutuality, romance, loss, healing, and destiny. Those are like the like topics for each. Like you could just do one thing for one of those chapters and like that would have like a huge impact. Like you were both just talking about like working with children, like that has a huge impact, and it's just one section of what she talks about in this book. So if anybody has any like I want to do something with this, thoughts, because I'm curious. Like I was kind of struggling with that. So this was like, what do I do besides break up with my boyfriend?
That's an
That'll do it.
If this book gives you all the insight you need on a relationship that is not loving, I feel like that's.
Yeah.
To preface, I didn't read the book, but that's why I came for the conversation. And that's why I keep asking, because I do want to read it. But I like to think of books like this, where it's just someone giving their insight as like a grandmother or a mom or like one of the familial units, whether blood related or not, like giving you advice. And sometimes it's not about action stuff. Sometimes it's just about listening and reflecting. And like, yeah, what I would say with the passages and stuff, and like having these discussions about love, like those are some things that I would have conversations with my mom. So it's like if somebody's gonna have a conversation with me, and for a book, just reflecting with myself, I feel like
This book feels like listening.
Mhm.
Like she just like she feels like a listener.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the impact really, like, the main one that I've gotten so far, I view this book, like, this is like my new Bible, for however long it needs to be my Bible. I just see myself like rereading a certain chapter whenever I just feel like I need to. That's what I've been calling it whenever I've been talking. I'm like, this is my Bible. But no, I think one of the biggest impact that I've gotten from it so far is just simply, it's it's making me just actively think about how I am interacting with the kids that I'm teaching. And how my actions as an adult are going to affect them growing up, and how, like what influence will I have, whether it's big or small, will I have on them? And as they grow up, do I want to, I want to cause as little harm as possible. And yeah, I want them to leave my class. Like I teach K4, so like next year they're all going to kindergarten. So like I want them to leave my class, prepared emotionally and maturity wise, to enter elementary school, where discipline is different, and the structure of the day is different. I want them to not freak out when they realize that. And yeah, just teaching them like in a soft way, but in a way that's also stern enough and structured enough to actually get that through to them. Just teaching them emotional maturity, while at the same time working on my emotional maturity. Yeah.
For me, it's what I would take away from the book is finding the difference in all of my relationships, say the friendships, familyships, actual loving romantic relationships, the ways that I am caring and the ways that I'm loving, and the ways that I can improve that within myself and within my relationships that I actually want to like grow and have them for a very long time in my life. I think that the honesty chapter was definitely one of the biggest ones for me. And it's not to say like everyone does white lies in their life. I just feel like that's such a crazy dynamic, because even with ourselves, protecting other people and their emotions, we tend not to share things because it just makes it easier for all of us in the long run. So in my experiences with family, with romantic relationships and friendships, that's just something that I am now reading back from. It's like, okay, how can I change this dynamic? How can I make this easier for myself? Because that's lifting that weight. But it's also lifting weight on you as well, because we're not in this like limbo of feelings. So just where we at, who we are. I don't know, it just makes it better, and that it's more welcoming for everyone. It's building that community. It's opening that door. So, you're your own person, I'm my own person, which we are, but here we are in this community that we're both putting our money pots into it. We're building it together. Yeah. Sure.
For me, one of my biggest takeaways when I was reading the chapter 4 about commitment, she kind of talks about self-love, and like while I was reading, I was like, this is probably going to be the most difficult chapter for me to read. And then on page 66, she says, this one was the most difficult for me to write. I was like, that was such a snapping face. And I was like, I think of myself as like a very caring person. Like I'm very caring, like in my relationship with my boyfriend, with my family. I'm never like the person who's not gonna, like I always tell my friends like what I appreciate about them, like what I like, and like things like that. And I thought about it, I was like, I've never done that for myself. And I was like, wow, I really just need to like have love for myself. I'm sorry, I'm very
I love that.
Yeah.
I've never thought about it.
Yeah.
I've never thought about loving myself. And I was like, getting ready to think about it. I was like,
I love it.
Yeah.
I think honestly, the only reason that kept me from crying while reading this book was that I did most of it in public. But I would say all but like 3 chapters I read in public settings, because I read the first chapter at home and I was like, let me go to the bar. Let me go to the cafe. Let me read it at work. Like, I'm the type of person like for the most part, I cannot cry in public. So yeah, I appreciate you doing that. I appreciate that.
I'm a crier. I almost cried earlier. I was like, I can cry. I'm a crier. It's
Yeah. I think
Lovely.
another takeaway that I'm just now like thinking about with like what Josie said about, like not sharing certain things. I think that another thing that I was thinking about before, like as I was going through it, in terms of communication and honesty, I was thinking a lot about my family and the ways in which I don't communicate with them. I talk regularly with my family, with my mom, my brother, my sister. Like I talk regularly with them, but my communication is not very open. I don't talk to them all the time about how I feel. I don't talk to them all the time about what I'm doing or what I'm going through and all that stuff. And that stems from how I grew up. But like I have a lot of different things, flourishing, let's say, in my life right now, and I'm at a point where it's like, oh, I like need to express these things to my family. So like I feel like this book is helping me figure out more ways in which I can express that to my family. And there's also another thing, I think it's in the honesty chapter, where she talks about the differences between like privacy and secrecy.
Yes.
And I think we talked about this last night for a bit. She says, it's in the honesty chapter. In our culture, privacy is often confused with secrecy. This is on page 45. Open, honest, truth-telling individuals value privacy. We all need spaces where we can be alone with thoughts and feelings, where we can experience healthy psychological autonomy, and can choose to share when we want to. Keeping secrets is usually about power, about hiding and concealing information. And then while privacy, this is on page 46, while privacy strengthens all our bonds, secrecy weakens and damages connection. Lerner points out that we do not usually know the emotional cost of keeping a secret until the truth is disclosed. Usually secrecy involves lying, and lying is always a setting for potential betrayal and violation of trust. And that was like jarring for me, because I, a lot of my childhood, I had to conceal a lot of, just simply how I felt or what I was doing, like I had to conceal it. And then I had this whole dark night of the soul where I was like, oh my God, I need to be honest. And then I feel bad about being honest, and the whole shebang. But I struggle sometimes because I have a friend, my best friend, so it's like, you're so vague and you're so mysterious and ambiguous and you're keeping secrets. And blah. I'm like, I'm not really I don't think of it as keeping secrets. I'm thinking of it as, I'm not thinking of it as undisclosed information that I'm keeping to myself. It's more so this is a private thing that emotionally I haven't quite worked through being able to share with other people, or specifically I can maybe share something with you or share something with you, but I can't share it with you yet. I can't share it with you yet. And that's nothing against anybody that I haven't shared it with yet. It's just simply emotionally, I feel as though I can disclose this with you and you. And I hope that one day I can get there with you and you. But there's I don't know, the stark differences that she pulls up between privacy and secrecy were just really jarring for me, because I was like, am I a more secretive person? Am I a more just private person? I don't know. Maybe that's a secret, but this is just private. All those different things. But back to talking about my family, I feel like I am teetering that same line with just what I'm disclosing to my family. Am I just being private and not sharing certain things with them, or am I just keeping secrets from them for their sake and for just my sake?
It can be hard to tell that line. When I read that particular line in the book, I was like, it threw me for a loop. I definitely got in my head for a second. I was like, wait, have I been lying or just having privacy?
Yeah.
You told me. I was just going to say that I think the difference is if somebody were to ask you,
Would
Would
you?
you lie or would you tell them?
That's a great point.
Really?
That is a great point.
I was thinking about it in the context of like boyfriend asking me, how are you feeling right now? Or like, what's going on? And me not really knowing yet how I was feeling and what was going on. And like knowing that my initial thoughts and my initial emotions will often come out as like anger or something like that, when I have know from experience that if I sit with them for a little while, they distill into more discrete emotions that are like better expressed and like better representative of like how I'm feeling. And so like if he were to ask me that and then he did right after I read this, what's going on? I was like, I don't think I can like talk about that yet. That felt like privacy to me versus secrecy, where it was like I am withholding something from him, but it's like not because I'm trying to like hurt, but because I'm trying to actually like not hurt myself or him in that moment with like something that's not fully formed. So that felt like a good example to me of like the privacy secrecy difference. Whereas like if he asked me like what's going on and I was sitting there like I cheated, and then not telling him, that would be like a big old lie.
What's the line between like, yeah, what happened? Just throwing a scenario out there. You did cheat, right?
That person,
like, what's going
yeah.
on? That girl. He comes and asks you, yeah, like, what's going on? And in the moment, you're like, I'm processing something right now. Don't know how to tell you yet. You're being honest. Like, still privacy. You're not holding a secret.
If you
Follow
genuinely
the line,
meant that.
I don't know.
Like, did he ask if you did?
He didn't.
No, but that's what I'm saying.
Oh, like, if
he
he
didn't
asked,
ask
I
that
feel like there's a lot of
question.
hypotheticals there.
Gotcha,
If you didn't ask that
So this is
exact
the mind fuck of that is that,
Yeah.
that section of the book.
Yeah. But I think it's like, okay, if you ask that specific question and you lied, that's being secretive.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But, because there's nothing to think about, it's the answer to the question. But if he's asking what's wrong, and you're just like, how do I say this in a way that is okay for me and for the other person?
I think that like that reminds me of like the I think it's in the commitment section where she talks about like how women lie in a way that creates powerlessness.
It's 42.
Was it the I have it marked, my highlighter won't be. I'm not sure if it's,
Is it,
we're on a hunt.
Women are often comfortable wanting to in order to manipulate them.
Yeah, it's like this pretending of powerlessness thing that she talks about. And like, I thought that was like, well, that's a big part of the reason why it's hard for me to discern like lying. And I don't even see this just in my like personal relationships. Like I also see this in like in the workplace. Like when I was young, I had an internship and I wanted to learn how to code. And there was this guy that I worked with who was the one who knew how to code. And I knew that I could ask him questions and he would teach me. I also knew he had a thing for me and that it was creepy. And I kind of like engaged in like a level of like powerlessness with him, like actively, because I knew I could get what I wanted from him. And this is like, I think like one of the big reasons why it's so hard to like to take some of like the honesty into action, which is like I don't like I had some guilt initially about that action, but then I realized like as I've gotten older, like that was a situation that like I just had to do what I had to do. Like I think I would prefer not to do it again, but like but you know that's where I was. And like you know I think it's important not to judge our past actions too much, but rather like move forward with them. And like as I continued working there, it became like increasingly toxic work environment. Lots like it was majority men working there. The only other women who worked there were like support staff. So they were not like giving women the respect they deserved in the workplace. And eventually I left because of it. And I was thinking about like what is honesty. I think sometimes honesty is leaving. So I left that workplace and like we don't all have that luxury, right? Because we need to get paid. But I had that luxury at that time. And like I think if we can leave toxic situations that are like not serving us and that are built on foundations of like lies and mistrust, that in and of itself is like a really large act of honesty. And then like whatever you do from that point forward, like you can make whatever change you feel you need to like live in like more of an honest truth with yourself, or like live by the love ethic or something. But I think that's like my biggest takeaway from this is just like, okay, maybe you're not living in honesty right now in some way in your life, but if you can make a change in some small part, then because it will have impact like on yourself and whoever like you can talk to about it or relate to. Like that's why there's like survival, like domestic abuse survivors groups. Like there's power in what?
Yeah.
They do, yeah. There's power in the discussion. So
I think each like relationship dynamic can be so different too, and yeah, I don't know if there's like a one size fits all like answer between like, should I share this with this person, because it's, what's the dynamic, are you safe, like, what are the power dynamics there? I had a conversation a few weeks ago with my therapist about manipulation, because I come from had a relationship with someone who was very manipulative, an adult as a child. And I was just saying, oh my God, I'm manipulative like this person. And she was explaining to me, like, everyone manipulates a little bit. It's as social beings, like your example of the coding situation, like we all have something we need, and we all sort of shift our behaviors in certain social situations to get things that we need. And there is a line that things can cross when then you have to start to consider, like, what is the impact? Is it malicious? Is it causing harm? And I think those are, I love the way that she sort of framed, like, I lost it, but then she said that, like, usually keeping secrets is usually about power. So that's when I start to think of, like, all the power dynamics that we see today, like where is harm being done? Who's causing the harm? Yeah, because there is a difference in, being hyper individualistic in a way that is harmful to community and having personal autonomy and like keeping something because it's personal. I think the difference between personal and private you're talking about. But yeah, that sort of shifted the way that I see a lot of things, that idea of like everyone, because we're social beings, like we manipulate the ways that we act often, but it's not always in a malicious, like harmful way.
She talks about Buddhism a lot in this, and one thing that she brings up is that like this Buddhist concept of interbeing, and she actually uses the word interbeing, and like in Buddhism that is like my idea of myself is created by your idea of yourself. Like we are all a reflection of each other, so like we're co-creative beings. So like of course you engage in, like, you could call it manipulation, but it's just co-creation of like the reality that we live in. But like if you're co-creating like power dynamics, I think you can. It kind of made me wonder, like, does everybody agree that you can be completely rid like social interaction and like human interaction in society of power dynamics? Like, is that possible? I think that's like something that religion has been trying to solve for like a really long time, and like I don't think it's worked. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Be a pessimist, but I don't think so. I think that and that's not to say, that's not to say that I don't think that, certain structures like capitalism and the patriarchy and, that certain, like those, like, I don't want to say smaller, but like those, like, umbrella things that are under what power is. that, not to say that those pillars can't be knocked down and refurbished, and rebuilt into better, systems, but I feel like power,
Is it power dynamics or hierarchy? Because I think in the space there's no hierarchy. Power dynamics.
Power
doesn't
dynamics,
exist.
yeah.
Yeah,
Like even when we're talking about parents and children, like,
The whole reason why, I feel like the whole reason why, at least one of the huge reasons why humanity has gotten this far is because from the very beginning of our inception, and this is going into fucking anthropology, we don't have to go down that road, but we learned how to cultivate and essentially gain power over the environment, over the animals and the plants and the water, and like, you know, I feel like that's something that has just been ingrained in us since we started doing all this shit.
yeah, it's like, yeah, I thought about that a lot while I was reading this book. I was like, is this possible? Like, what? Are we gonna do it? Like, I personally like read a lot of Buddhist philosophy and like identify like quite a bit with it. I find it really interesting. I'm not sure I would call myself a Buddhist. So like that idea of like ridding ourselves of like the self is like critical to Buddhism, where you're supposed to like, I guess like no longer, like you're supposed to see yourself in others. That interbeing is supposed to be a like a helpful concept to like see yourself in others rather than to like, you know, concentrate so much on like the individualized self and like think about only your needs, but think about like your needs in relationship to others. Like I think that piece makes a lot of sense to me about what she's talking about here. Like, but it all like there's always a balance. Like, you know, you pay in one way or another for most things. It's like, I guess it's like physics, right? Relativity. Yeah. Matter just doesn't show up out of nowhere.
Yeah, I do agree that hierarchy is something that we can overcome. Yeah, I guess that's why literally like change, like that's part of why we're doing this, because we do think that hierarchy can be overcome.
Yeah.
And I think that Bell Hooks has very much the same, but that's a huge intention of hers, I think, in spreading her insight and spreading her experiences, that she thinks that people can really learn to overcome. She talks so much about capitalism and patriarchy, white supremacy. She's like, we can do this, and she believes that it has to happen in a loving way. Love has to be at the core of it.
I feel like it's like that. Like you're trying to find a more perfect place. Like you can't get perfection. You can't get no power dynamics, but you can get like closer, closer, closer.
She mentioned.
Yeah, the perfect love.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is no fear.
Yeah, and she talks about like not being afraid of the word perfect too.
Mhm.
I didn't get to that point. It's not being.
It's towards the end.
I can't remember which chapter it was, but I think she was talking about like needing to like working towards a goal essentially. It's like doesn't imply perfection, but like yeah.
She mentions
I'm not gonna do a
perfect
good job.
love
I should
in-
stop myself.
It's in the
It's a
Roman
progress. It's not you're trying to achieve perfection. It's
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm thinking exactly.
I feel like it's so much like there's
I know.
there's not a chance.
We can only move from perfect passion. See, and this is the romance chapter, so I don't know if it's exactly pertaining to what we're talking about right now, but
It could be.
we can only move from perfect passion to perfect love when the illusions pass and we are able to use the energy and intensity generated by intense, overwhelming erotic bonding to heighten self-discovery. Perfect passions usually end when we awaken from our enchantment and find only that we have been carried away from ourselves. It becomes perfect love when our passion gives us the courage to face reality, to embrace our true selves. Acknowledging this meaningful link between perfect passion and perfect love from the onset of a relationship can be the necessary inspiration that empowers us to choose love.
grass is green over there, the grass is green over there.
I know there's a point where she talks about it, like, where she goes in specifics to like talking about the word perfect.
I think it might have been in the chapter you were talking about, like whichever one where she was talking about like self-love. Do you know what chapter? Was that the commitment chapter? Because I think she was talking about like her personal journey with
Wait, okay.
That's amazing. Oh, in the values, that's not the one you were just reading, right?
No.
Okay. So she quotes, it's from the Christian Bible. John says, "There's no fear in love." That fear is not made of perfect love. And then she said, "I was fascinated by the repeated use of the word perfect. For some time, I thought of this word only in relation to being without fault or defect. Taught to believe that this understanding of what it means to be perfect was always out of human reason, that we were of necessity essentially human because we were not perfect, but we're always bound by the mystery of the body, by our limitations. This call to know perfect love disturbed me. It seemed a worthy calling, but impossible. That is, until I looked for a deeper, more complex understanding of the word perfect and found a definition emphasizing the will to refine." So just the idea of continually refining.
Again, I feel like that is like perfect in terms of like perfect love, or like I am not perfect, we're using it as an adjective, and here we are again. She's changing it into a verb. You know, it's like it's perfecting, constantly working to perfect something. I think without the goal, I think she says later on, like there's like with understanding that, you know, there may never be like an end goal that is met, but just simply working to perfect this thing as much as we possibly can.
like as issues come up. I think my therapist like described to me, she's like, all relationships are a process of rupture and repair. And so she said, so like, you know, I think you can apply that like to any relationship or like large institution to like institutions are best when like they break and must be repaired like over and over again. So I feel like that works. I like that refinement thing.
So that's your question. Is this possible? It really depends on your ideology of humanity.
Yeah.
I like to think, especially politically, we can always be pushing for more progress. When we do, as well, dismantle these systems at some point, even if we don't live to see it, surely, probably, humanity will find another way to have dominion and power over people. But then hopefully, as we like build communities of the ethic of love, like they could then say like, okay, progress, what does progress mean for us?
Right after you start reading, contrary to the notion that one must work to attain perfection, this outcome does not have to be struggled for. It just goes to the opposite. Practice is perfect. For yourself to like achieve some sort of thing. And love is easy. Like it's like, you know, you don't have to do too much for it to just be nice.
Yeah. My friend's grandmother used to say practice makes it less mediocre.
Yeah.
And I think reference this song because like, oh my god, we should make a Spotify playlist. All of our favorite love songs.
I would love that.
So all of that when we honor the birthday.
just makes less.
Loves him.
Did anybody like also think about like the amount that she talks about fear in this book? She mentions fear like
I think that far. I mean, I think the honesty one, she touched on it a couple of times,
Yeah.
about fearful to be honest.
yeah.
But I think beyond that, when you get to privilege,
I think it's like all over the place. I think it's like a lot of it happens in the death chapter. Because like yeah, that's pretty wild, like the death worship part. But I think the fear seems to be like a pretty like important topic in this book. Like it's kind of the enemy
Yeah.
of a lot of the like values that she discusses. Fear is the primary force upholding structured domination. 93.
Towards the beginning, she talks a lot about, I don't know if it's like in the introduction or, she talks about it literally in every chapter now.
Yeah.
But like she talks about like the fear and like insecurity. A lot of us are insecure, whether consciously or unconsciously, we're insecure about how little we actually know about love and how little we actually are able to give and receive love. We're insecure about that. And we're fearful of, she says something, she like compares it to, well, she says the truth is far too many people in our culture do not know what love is. And this not knowing feels like a terrible secret, a lack that we have to cover up. This is in the first chapter, but there's also a point where she compares it to the change that is required. And us being fearful of making that change and of actually like trusting ourselves enough and having enough faith in ourselves to actually accomplish it, whether personally or just in communities or as a society. She compares it to when computers, like personal computers and all of that stuff was being first introduced to people and how fearful everyone was of that. But then here we are now, obviously something went right. Obviously people got over it. So it's like she's basically implying the same thing can happen with love and applying that actively to our lives. You know, it's scary to think about it now, but you know, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, we weren't using computers as much as we are now. We didn't have computers literally sitting in our pockets all the time. I don't know. I know that she specifically mentioned computers, but I'm not.
So she on page 101, she has like a really nice like sum up about like the relationship of love and fear. And she says that learning how to face our fears is one way we embrace love. Our fears may not go away, but will not stand in the way. Those of us who have already chosen to embrace a love ethic, allowing it to govern and inform how we think and act, know that when we let our light shine, we draw to us and are drawn to other bearers of light. We are not alone. And I think that like in talking about fear so much, I think she's just kind of going back to like how that makes like love kind of like shine brighter. And like there's so much fear, but there's also so much love that we can share.
It's like a lack of fear lies in like abundance. I think she uses the term lack a lot around the time she uses the term fear. Like she even talks about that in the end, like in the death chapter where she's talking about like so much of like fear from people. Like I think she gives the example of like a like young Asian American man going to the door of like a white man and the white man like shooting him out of fear based on like race and ethnicity. And like this is all just based around like fear of lack, like a fear of like losing their superiority and like what they own and like the land that they're on, their property, etc. And like in the same way, when we don't choose to love, we are like allowing like that like fear of lack to like dictate our actions and act in ways that are like unkind to others. And we therefore like don't attract that like amount of light and abundance into our lives. If you get more, you give more. It's like it you're saying how like tied to lack it seems to be for, I mean, I think it is, like, I would agree, but.
Like, why are some people scared of love? And I think it's like, they're scared of love, I think they're scared of the reciprocation.
So it comes down to like your body responds out of fear. So it's not that it's doing it to hurt you, it's doing it to protect you. Throughout your life, you kind of come to terms with it and respect it and see it. Fear is not your enemy, really. It's your friend. It's protecting you.
Hey, but.
Yeah, I got this.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay, thank you
Yeah.
for being here, but time for me to take the reins.
Like, I really mentioned about children and family, and I think when we're talking about love, and we're all adults. When we're talking about love, I think recognizing like we're all trying to heal our inner child. And like whatever we lacked as a child is what we're striving for in adulthood, which can be very dangerous if you don't have the knowledge of like why you do something like self-sabotage. Why do you think it was what it is because this person was in your life? It's maybe like she's teaching us that like we have to look at children to like make sure we're not imposing the same damage that was imposed onto us, but also healing ourselves first. And like maybe I'm talking about that we necessarily think we need to like find out how to love ourselves before getting into it.
She talks about
Yes,
that.
she has a great quote about that. Well, so you know, like that quote from like Person Being a Wallflower, it's like we accept the love we think we deserve.
Yeah.
On page 68, she says, and I add, do not expect to receive the love from someone else you do not give yourself. And she kind of talks about how like you shouldn't look to somebody to fill a piece of love that like you can't give yourself. But like if you don't love everything about yourself, that doesn't mean you can't be like in a romantic relationship. That doesn't mean that your family can't love you because you don't love yourself. It just means that you shouldn't try to find it in somewhere else. You should try to find it in yourself.
Before you do reading this book or going on this book, I read this like actually, it says love without expectation. And I just read that after I was like, just because somebody can't reciprocate the love, doesn't mean you shouldn't stop loving.
Yeah.
That is, that's a lot of courage.
Okay. Really like this.
Yeah.
I really love this.
The next one's book.
I don't think that we need to read a book.
What do we have to show?